January 1987. In the UK began surprisingly quietly. Southern England, Kent, and London were enjoying a typically mild winter. Drizzle, fog, and temperatures rarely dipping below freezing. Suburbanites were already planning their spring garden plantings, and shops were displaying mid-season clothing collections. But at the other end of the continent, in the very heart of Siberia, a monster had already been born. Meteorologists began to notice an anomalously powerful anticyclone on their charts, which they dubbed the Siberian Express. This gargantuan mass of icy air began its rapid westward movement, swallowing Europe. By January 10th, Britain felt the breath of the Arctic. The sky over Kent took on an ominous lead-grey hue, and the birds, usually bustling at this time of year, suddenly went silent. It was the silence before a strike that would forever be known as the Big Freeze. The blow struck on the night of January 12th. The temperature plummeted with incredible speed, reaching -22 degrees Celsius in some areas of the southeast. But the most terrifying aspect was the wind. Hurricane-force gusts coming from the North Sea created a wind chill effect, making the human body feel temperatures as low as -35 degrees Celsius. Within hours, fine, biting snow transformed the blooming counties into something resembling an Antarctic station. Southerners, accustomed to seeing snow only once every few years as a light dusting, were faced with a wall of white chaos. Visibility on the roads dropped to 5 meters. Margaret Thatcher's Britain, proud of its economic and technological successes, found itself paralyzed overnight. This didn't feel like the gradual onset of winter. It felt like a sudden military invasion, where instead of soldiers, ice crystals advanced, clogging car radiators and freezing door locks. By the morning of January 13th, southern England had officially ceased to function. Newspapers ran headlines like "The Arctic in the Suburbs," but even they didn't convey the full horror of the situation. In Kent and Sussex, snowdrifts grew to 2 meters in just a few hours, cutting off hundreds of villages from civilization. Power lines, not designed for such ice weight and wind force, began to snap all along the coast. Hundreds of thousands of people woke up in freezing homes to find that the water in their taps had turned to ice and gas had stopped flowing due to frozen valves at distribution stations. The modern world of computers and faxes instantly shrank to the size of a single room heated by candles and old paraffin heaters. The Siberian Express had arrived on time, and its final stop was a proud Briton, found completely unprepared for a meeting with a true winter. For thousands of Britons who set off for work on the morning of January the 13th, a routine commute turned into a multi-hour struggle for survival. The railway network of the southeast, the busiest in the country, was the first to capitulate. The problem wasn't just the snowdrifts, but the ice glaze that coated the third rails. Electric trains simply lost power and stalled in the middle of snow-covered fields. By midday, hundreds of trains sat frozen, transformed into steel crypts. The heating in the carriages failed instantly, and the temperature inside began to plummet. Passengers in light office coats and suits found themselves trapped, the windows frosted over from the inside from people's breath, while on the outside they were methodically buried by snow until the carriages blended into the landscape. A true nightmare unfolded on the line between London and the Kent coast. Several trains got stuck directly inside tunnels, in total darkness, beneath vaults dripping with giant icicles. People spent 10 to 12 hours. There was no contact with the outside world. In 1987, mobile phones were a rarity and did not work under such conditions. Drivers stepping out of their cabs sank chest deep into the snow while trying to reach the nearest emergency phone, many of which were frozen solid. Social barriers crumbled. Bank clerks and construction workers sat huddled together on the carriage floors, trying to stay warm with collective body heat while rescue crews literally hacked a path to the stranded trains. Railway workers deployed old steam locomotives that remained in the depots, hoping they could punch through the drifts, but even this powerful machinery yielded. In some sections, the snow was so dense that the locomotives simply floated onto the drifts, derailing. Evening newspapers wrote of ghost trains left abandoned along the tracks, buried up to their roofs. By nightfall, it was clear that the country's transport system hadn't just glitched, it had ceased to exist. London was cut off from its southern ports as securely as if a great wall of ice had grown between them. Thousands spent that night in stations, sleeping on newspapers and suitcases, watching through vast windows as their familiar world finally vanished under a white shroud. If on the railways, people were trapped in carriages, on the motorways of southern England, a different kind of drama unfolded, the drama of choice. The M2, M20, and London's famous M25 orbital turned into gargantuan parking lots. Due to zero visibility and the instant icing of the asphalt, traffic came to a dead halt. Lorries trying to climb the Kentish hills skidded helplessly, jackknifing across the lanes and completely blocking the path for everyone else. Within hours, tailbacks stretched for dozens of miles. Drivers faced a terrifying choice: stay in the car and hope for rescue, risking freezing to death or carbon monoxide poisoning while trying to keep warm, or abandon the vehicle and attempt to reach the nearest shelter on foot through the raging blizzard. Thousands chose the second option. It was a surreal sight for 1987. Modern Fords and Rovers sat abandoned right in the middle of the lanes, slowly being swallowed by the snow, while lines of people in office attire trudged past them, hunched against the icy wind. Men in thin-soled shoes and women in heeled boots sank knee-deep into drifts, trying to feel for the edges of the road. Police patrols, getting stuck themselves, could only mark abandoned cars with tape so that snowplows, if they ever arrived, wouldn't ram into them. By the evening of January 14th, over 3,000 empty cars stood on the M20 alone, a ghost fleet in a white ocean. Those who stayed in their cars endured the longest night of their lives. Radio stations constantly broadcasted pleas not to leave vehicles, yet help did not come. Snow clogged exhaust pipes, turning cabins into gas chambers, forcing people to step out into the minus 20 degrees Celsius frost every half hour to clear the space around their cars. That night on Britain's roads, many stories of true courage were born. Truck drivers took freezing motorists into their cabs, sharing the last drops of tea from thermoses and leftover sandwiches. The roads had ceased to be transport links. They had become a front line where the main objective was to survive until dawn without becoming part of the icy landscape. For the residents of the affluent south of England, a home had always been a castle. But in January 1987, that castle began to freeze to its core. British houses of that era, often lacking serious thermal insulation, were not designed for Siberian frosts. As the outside temperature stalled at minus 20 degrees Celsius, Central heating systems began to fail. Gas mains froze, and due to rolling blackouts, modern boilers turned into useless heaps of metal. People woke up in bedrooms where a finger-thick layer of ice had formed on the inside of window frames. That week in Kent and Surrey, the most popular items in the house weren't computers or TVs, but old hot water bottles and woolen blankets dragged from the deepest shelves. Daily life became a struggle against freezing water. Water pipes, laid too close to external walls, burst with a sound resembling gunshots. As the water inside turned to ice, it expanded, shattering copper and lead. Thousands of families found themselves not only without heat, but without a drop of water. It froze even inside toilet cisterns. In supermarkets, where trucks struggled to break through, bread, milk, and candles vanished instantly. People stood in queues wrapped in multiple layers of clothing, resembling shadows from a distant wartime past. In some areas, it came to neighbors forming small communes, cooking meals on the one surviving fireplace on the street and moving mattresses into a single room to keep warm with their collective breath. The elderly suffered the most. For the generation that remembered 1947, this winter was a bitter sense of déjà vu, with the difference that they were now much frailer. Social services could not punch through 2-meter snowdrifts to reach isolated pensioners in the countryside. It was then that the spirit of British solidarity emerged. Youths on skis and volunteers on tractors delivered hot meals and coal to those in white captivity. This was a moment of truth for Thatcherite Britain, obsessed with individualism. The elements forced people to remember that surviving alone when an icy hell is just outside the wall is nearly impossible. By late January 1987, the anticyclone's icy grip finally loosened. Moist Atlantic winds replaced the Arctic air, and southern England began to thaw. But the long-awaited warmth brought new problems. Millions of liters of meltwater rushed into pipes that had burst during the week, causing massive flooding in homes that were just starting to warm up. The walls of thousands of cottages in Kent and Sussex were literally weeping, and insurance companies faced a volume of claims unseen for decades. The total economic damage ran into hundreds of millions of pounds, but the primary losses weren't financial. The country realized that its infrastructure, from railways to water mains, was extremely vulnerable to extreme weather. The collapse was a serious blow to the government's prestige. It became clear that the slogan, "Britain is working," didn't apply if there were 10 extra centimeters of snow on the tracks. It was after 1987 that British railways began a major modernization, installing point heaters and changing third rail designs so that ice glaze could no longer paralyze train movements. Energy companies revised their protocols for operating in anomalous cold, and building codes were tightened in favor of better thermal insulation. Britain began to learn to live in a world where climatic surprises could turn a London suburb into an Arctic outpost within hours. Decades later, the Big Freeze of '87 remains in the British memory as the last true winter of the 20th century. It became a cultural phenomenon, a moment when the era of VCRs and the first PCs collided with the primal power of nature. People still recall abandoning their brand new cars on the M25 and melting ice in pots just to make a cup of tea. The crisis reminded the nation that civilization is but a thin film of heat and light that can be stripped away by a single sharp gust of wind from Siberia. The lesson of 1987 is simple. Progress gives us comfort, But only solidarity and readiness for the worst allow us to survive when that comfort vanishes under a white shroud of blizzard.